Chapter 11, A History of Magic. You are listening at Mtlnovel Audio. The afternoon class was History of Magic, and Ravenclaw and Slytherin attended the class together. Sitting in front of Wade was a boy with light blonde hair, and he was followed by two chubby little followers. Wade recognized the boy as Draco Malfoy, the villain who had been at loggerheads with the protagonist for 7 years in the original book. But the relationship between Slytherin and Ravenclaw was okay, and Malfoy did not spray venom at everyone. On the contrary, except that he spoke in a somewhat arrogant manner and liked to show off his family background and wealth intentionally or unintentionally, he was still polite in the classroom. However, he must have a different attitude towards his nemesis Harry Potter. When Professor Binns appeared in the classroom through the wall, Malfoy was still talking bad about Harry Potter to his followers, showing off the scar on his head all day long, as if it was so great, and hanging out with the stinky Weasleys. His whole body was covered with the shabby smell of their family, that the surrounding Ravenclaws looked sideways and quietly distanced themselves from the Slytherins. No matter what happens in the future, Harry Potter is still a hero in the eyes of many wizards. These children in the school basically grew up listening to his stories. Draco Malfoy's words naturally disgusted everyone, and at the same time reminded others of some facts that have been covered up. I heard that Draco Malfoy's father is a Death Eater who follows the mysterious man, Michael whispered to Wade. It is said that after the mysterious man was defeated by Harry Potter, his father claimed that he was under the Imperius curse and donated a lot of money to the Ministry of Magic, so he escaped from prison. Look at his appearance. It is obvious that his father still hates Harry Potter for defeating his master, so he is influenced by his father. Wade shook his head secretly in his heart. He knew that Draco Malfoy must not have thought so much. He seemed to want to make friends with Harry Potter at first, but his arrogant attitude made Harry Potter look down on him. How could the arrogant young master suffer such grievances? So he persisted in opposing the savior. Don't take it lightly, and don't get close to Malfoy. Michael reminded, their family is the one that cares most about bloodline among the 28 holy families. 28 holy families? This involves Wade's knowledge blind spot. It is 28 pure-blood families. There are no Muggles in their ancestors, and no one in the family has married with Muggles. Michael said indifferently, but my father said it was all nonsense, because many of the families listed in the list have Muggle ancestors, or they claim to have Muggle ancestors. It must be said that the history of magic is indeed a boring class. Because the ghost Professor Binns who taught them has been teaching them in a hypnotic voice, reading from the book, neither asking questions nor caring about what the students are doing, speaking with a wheezing sound and unclear tone. In less than 5 minutes, half of the students in the classroom lay down, and the remaining half were basically either dozing off or secretly drawing squares on the parchment for taking notes to play chess games. Wade blocked out Professor Binns' hypnotic voice, drew a timeline on paper, and listed important dates, historical figures, and major events in the history of magic. These are also the things that are tested in the magic history exams in the wizarding world. On Wade's desk was a book called Hogwarts, a history of the school borrowed from the library. Comparing the two, one can't help but wonder what kind of magnificent adventures and struggles the 4 founders of Hogwarts had in history, and what role Hogwarts played in the next 1,000 years. History itself is actually very interesting, but Professor Binns made this class unattractive. When the get-out of class was over, Professor Binns' voice stopped abruptly and slowly floated away through the wall. Wade woke up Michael, and the two went to the library together to complete the homework of the history of magic, a 1-foot-long paper on the reign of terror of the demon Emmerich. No one in the whole Hogwarts is more diligent than you. Michael muttered while doing his homework. I bet other students must wait until the last day to do their homework. Before he finished speaking, a shaky figure passed by the two of them. Hermione was carrying a thick stack of books. When she saw Wade, she stopped and put the books on the table. Michael felt that the whole desk shook. Hi, Wade. Hermione greeted him, sat down directly, and asked, How is Ravenclaw? Except that there are too many stairs to climb, there is nothing wrong. Wade introduced, Hermione, this is Michael Corner. Michael, this is Hermione Granger, we met on the train. Hello. Hermione was very brave and enthusiastic like a little lion. She stretched out her hand directly. Are you also a Ravenclaw? Michael looked at the height of the stack of books, swallowed his saliva, shook hands and hesitated. But, maybe, in front of these two people, he deeply felt that he might not be worthy of calling himself a Ravenclaw. Maybe. Hermione frowned, feeling the blood pressure of some kind of biological chain. Michael's stature inexplicably shrank a little. He whispered, "Can I ask, why did you take so many books? Are you going to read them all?" "Of course. These are the books I plan to finish reading this week," Hermione said as a matter of course. Michael's face turned pale, and he looked at Wade with his eyes. "What's going on? A week? More curious than you." Wade raised his eyebrows slightly at him. Michael stopped complaining about Wade dragging him to do homework and lowered his head to concentrate on completing the rest of his paper. Wade, who had already completed the paper, continued to make his own timeline. "Oh, your method is quite useful." Hermione leaned over to take a look and suggested, "But I think it would be more inspiring to combine it with Muggle history." "Well, I plan to add to that later." Wade pushed the part he had completed to her and said, "You've read more books than me. Can you help me check if there is anything that needs to be revised in the previous part?" "Let me see." Hermione did not refuse. After reading it carefully, she said, "Here, the specific time when the wand was born is unknown. Melina Sims's main contribution is to study the magical properties of 18 kinds of wand wood, and proposed the wand adaptation theory and Sims formula." She pulled out a book from her pile of books and flipped it open. In 382 BC, the Ollivander family began to make wands. To this day, the best wand makers are still the Ollivander family. I think this is also a test point. The quill pen quickly recorded on the parchment, and Madame Pants cast a vigilant eye over here from time to time, as if ready to drive a few people out at any time if they made a loud noise. Michael, who was working on his thesis, felt that he was becoming increasingly insignificant. He listened for a while, then silently pulled out a piece of paper and prepared to copy the timeline of the history of magic that Wade had revised. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he nudged Wade with his elbow and whispered, "Look." Theo was standing outside the library door, looking around. He probably just came back from the herbology class, and he was still covered in greenhouse soil, so Madame Pants didn't allow them to come in. Meeting Wade and Michael's gaze, Theo happily waved his hand, motioning them to go out. Wade said goodbye to Hermione, and packed up with Michael to go out. Seeing Ryan and Theo at the door, looking dirty, he asked, "Is there anything urgent?" The two Hufflepuffs looked at each other, and Ryan indicated with his chin, "Go ahead, you asked Professor Sprout." Theo smiled and said, "Wade, didn't you say you wanted to find a quiet place to practice spells this morning? Professor Sprout of the herbology class is the head of our Hufflepuff house. After class, I stayed to help the professor, and after class, I went to ask him courageously." Chapter 12 Cleaning Up. You are listening at novelfull.audio. You asked the professor? Michael was surprised. After taking Professor Snape's class, you still dare to ask the professor? Theo smiled. Professor Sprout is different, she is very kind. And I think, instead of practicing secretly, it is better to ask the professor for permission first, right? And practicing spells is not a bad thing. Then what? Professor Sprout provided us with a place. Wade asked. Yes. Theo nodded. An abandoned empty classroom. Professor Sprout said it must meet our requirements. Then what are you waiting for? Let's go. Let's go and see together. Michael said happily he didn't want to stay in the suffocating library any longer. Wade was about to leave, and suddenly looked back. In the huge library, Hermione was reading alone, looking lonely. Wade remembered that at this time, Hermione seemed to have no friends. Wait a moment. He said to the others, I'll call someone else. The book on the table was tapped twice. Hermione looked up and saw Wade smiling at her. Hermione, we are going to practice spells together. Do you want to join us? Hogwarts is the earliest established magic school. A long time ago, almost all underage wizards in Europe studied at Hogwarts. But later, other magic schools were established one after another, and many wizards chose to move to the United States to live, and their children studied at Ilvermorny School. While climbing the stairs, Theo panted and said, "So, Hogwarts can normally accommodate 1 or 2,000 students and hundreds of professors. But now there are only 200 or 300 people, and many classrooms are idle. For the safety of students, the school has hidden most of the abandoned empty classrooms. Professor Sprout told us that it is an unused spells classroom, and the space should be large." Ryan added, "Behind the portrait of Miss Claudia holding an umbrella on the 3rd floor." The few people searched along the corridor for a while and finally found the portrait in the corridor near the West Tower. The wind blew gently on the grassland full of flowers. A blonde girl held an umbrella with white background and pink flowers, looking into the distance with melancholy eyes, and turned sideways to face the crowd. Ryan took the magic wand and knocked 3 times on the left side of the portrait, saying the password, "Sunshine, Golden Daisy." The girl walked aside with her skirt, the portrait opened, and several people walked in one after another. After the portrait closed, the blonde girl changed the direction of the umbrella, and the rain began to fall in the portrait. This classroom has been idle for an unknown period of time. There is a thick layer of dust on the ground, some tables and chairs are placed in a mess, and there are a few old books and discarded parchment scattered on the ground. There is a row of wooden shelves on the 1st floor of the classroom against the wall, which are also empty and even broken in several places. In the corner, there are piles of targets for practicing spells, most of which are also broken. "Well, it looks like we need to clean up before we practice." Hermione rolled up her sleeves. "Who's going to get a basin of water?" "Me." Theo raised his hand. "I'll go find some cleaning tools first." "Why don't you ask the school's house elves to help clean up?" Michael said lazily. "You know that Hogwarts has a group of house elves, right?" Rian had already leaned over to pick up a fallen chair. "Wait a minute, everyone." Wade stopped Theo, who was about to leave, and asked others, "We are here to practice spells. Why don't we start by cleaning up this classroom?" "What? Don't you?" Michael looked at him in disbelief. "Clean it up and repair it as before. Start with these 2 spells." Wade looked at Ryan and said, "Moving tables, chairs and benches can only be done with the levitation spell." "Okay. It's a big project. But it sounds fun," Theo said with a smile. Ryan thought for a moment, put the chair he had just lifted back down, and waved his wand. "Clean it up." The table became a little cleaner, but there was still obvious dirt in the gaps. Ved blinked. "Ryan, say it again." Vader said. So Ryan used the cleaning spell again, but the effect was not very obvious. This time, Vader was sure that he saw it very clearly. When Ryan waved his wand, he vaguely saw another arc, the 2 superimposed together, similar but different, making him clearly realize why Ryan's spell did not work as it should. Just like when playing games, the plugin calculated the best route and attack angle for him. "Ryan, when you cast a spell, do this. Raise your wand a little higher and finish it more cleanly." Wade demonstrated. At the same time, Scourgify should be pronounced more lightly. "Do it again and try it." Ryan paused, perhaps because Hufflepuffs naturally trust Ravenclaw's mind more. He did not make any suggestions, but waved his wand according to Wade's modified version. "Clean it up." The table suddenly became shiny, as if even flies could not stand on it, and even the floor below became clean. Ryan's eyes widened, looking at his wand, then at Wade, and muttered, "How did you do it?" Others had almost the same reaction, and they all gathered around to look at the table. Theo even bent down and touched it again and again with his hands, exclaiming, "Ryan, I didn't know. You are a spell genius." "No, it's not because of me," Ryan said a little dazedly. He waved his wand again, but because he was too upset, it was not as effective as the last time. Wade didn't say anything. He also used a spell himself, but he didn't find the extra arc, just like his eyes could only see the names above other people's heads, but not his own name. But the experience of guiding Ryan made him know clearly what was right, so his spell was also perfect, and the cleaning range was even larger. Wade thought about it and asked the others to use the cleaning spell. As expected, the thin golden arc was seen again. Even Hermione's spell was not perfect, but it was closer to the standard than others. He instructed them one by one, so that the spells of several people were close to perfection. In the process, his own understanding gradually deepened. Later, he could use the perfect cleaning spell with a casual wave of the wand, even without reciting the spell. If the golden finger had a name, Wade felt that he might have a good teacher system. Just by glancing at the top of the student's head, he would know what name to call. Even if a group of people cast spells at the same time, he would know who was doing it seriously and who was just perfunctory. In one-on-one guidance, he could make targeted fine-tuning so that students could master a spell in the shortest time. Unfortunately, the golden finger was a silent one, and Wade didn't know if it had any undiscovered functions waiting to be developed, so he could only explore slowly. Chapter 13 Transfiguration. You are listening at Mtlnovel Audio. Vader thought that with the right guidance, most of the spells would be easy for them to master, but this was not the case. The level of magic ultimately depends on one's talent. Simple spells, such as cleaning spells and repairing spells, can't be seen to make any difference when several people cast them. But after the difficulty of the spell increased, Theo seemed to have a bit of difficulty. After learning the levitation spell more than a dozen times, it was still specious. Ryan and Michael were better, but they also worked sometimes. Hermione still succeeded once, but it is difficult to levitate heavy objects. But for students just starting out at magic school, successfully mastering even a simple spell is exciting. When several people walked to the auditorium at dinner time, Michael was still showing off to Theo. Did you see my last repair spell? It was perfect. The chandelier on the ceiling was restored to its original state immediately. I dare say, it was just hung on it. It's not that bright at all. Ryan was still waving his wand murmuringly, practicing spells silently. But accidentally, sparks erupted from the tip of the wand, almost setting Hermione's hair on fire. Oh, please. Don't point your wand at people, Hermione said immediately, then asked enthusiastically, what are you practicing? That her face seemed to say, come and ask me. Levitation spell. Ryan said. He had a good temper and could understand the little girl's eagerness to help despite her seemingly domineering attitude, so his attitude was very calm from beginning to end. Hermione said in surprise, but you succeeded just now. Ryan shook his head, I always feel like my spell is missing something. When the auditorium arrived, the sumptuous dinner exuded the tempting aroma, and several people seemed to realize that they were already hungry. Theo muttered, Merlin. I think I could eat a cow right now. The sense of accomplishment in learning a spell is great, but the hard work is too hard. After dinner, Michael finally couldn't wait to leave the study group and made an appointment with Terry, who shared a dormitory with him, to play Rolling Stones in the courtyard. Hermione and the others went back to the lounge to do their homework, while Wade took advantage of the library not closing and took the time to borrow 2 books he had read at noon. They had cleaned the practice room in the afternoon, repaired the tables and chairs and placed them against the wall. The empty cabinet next to them was used as a bookshelf. Vader turned on the light and put away his ink and quill. The sounds of cheers and laughter from the little wizards could be heard outside the window, while Wade opened the book and was immersed in reading. Magical theory, tampering with the deepest secrets at will, the source of life, the essence of self, must be prepared to bear the most extreme and dangerous consequences. Analysis of the operating principles of basic spells. Magic is the embodiment of the wizard's will. Whether it is to show off among their friends or to gain powerful power, young wizards are often more attracted to cool and magical spells and are willing to spend a lot of time practicing advanced spells. Difficult to pronounce, and boring theories are dismissed. Even though magic theory is a first-grade textbook, the little wizards would rather learn 2 curses like hot on fire than read such boring books. But Wade is different. Perhaps because when he was in school in his previous life, his teacher repeatedly emphasized that understanding the essence, understanding the principles, and mastering the rules can help him escape from the ever-changing question types, get rid of the rote learning method, and do not need to answer a lot of questions. You can also get high scores and successfully solve new types of questions. This is what is called efficient learning. That is to say, to know what it is, but also to know why it is so. This kind of study habit made Wade a god of study in the eyes of his teachers and classmates in his previous life. he went to bed early and got up early every day, and he still had time to play ball and play games. His grades were also among the best among many students who had headaches and thorns. Vader also maintained the same habit in this life. He believed that whether it was science or magic, or whether he had a golden finger or not, a solid foundation would definitely be of great and significant help to his learning. Defense against the dark arts was worse than expected. Vader had originally heard that Professor Quirrell was an extremely intelligent Ravenclaw who taught Muggle studies at Hogwarts a year ago. He is young, handsome, knowledgeable and very popular among the students. Vader thought that even though he had Voldemort hanging on the back of his head, his knowledge had not disappeared, and there should always be something useful in his classes, but the fact is that Quirrell lectured according to the script, and his words were confusing and his voice was unclear. It was hard to hear clearly when he was far away, but when he was close, the smell of garlic in his body caused pain to the Slytherins nearby. Mask, putting himself in his shoes, Vader could understand his state. Anyone with an extremely evil soul parasitizing on his head would have no intention of preparing lessons. But understanding does not mean acceptance. During the second defense against the dark arts class, Vader sat at the far end and read a book for self-study. Transfiguration is the most complex and dangerous spell we have in the Hogwarts curriculum. Anyone who behaves mischievously in my class will be kicked out and will never be allowed in again. Professor McGonagall said sternly during Transfiguration class. With a wave of her wand, she transformed the desk into a pig and back again, and the students' eyes lit up. Transfiguration is the most elegant magic, but to learn Transfiguration, you first need to understand Gamp's law of Transfiguration. Write it down, students. Don't be stupid. Before using the Transfiguration spell, you must first clearly picture in your mind what you want the object to look like. No distracting thoughts. Chaotic thinking will definitely lead to failure, and there are countless examples of this in history. It is very important to wave the wand firmly and decisively. When you first start learning, you must recite the spell clearly, but skilled wizards can complete the transformation without saying the spell. Incomplete transformation is both irresponsible and dangerous, especially in biological transformation. This involves the three theories of the law of transformation. If the transformation fails, it may cause extremely serious consequences. For example, a few years ago there was a French wizard, so when the transformation fails, it should be stopped immediately and restored to its original state. The spell is, Restore Original Form. Practice it with me now. Wade wrote at least 13 inches of notes on parchment and practiced, Restore Original Form, several times before Professor McGonagall asked them to really start practicing Transfiguration. She gave each person a match and asked them to turn it into a needle. Some students recited the spell loudly and poked the match, but there was no change. Wade did not act immediately. A sentence he read in a book yesterday flashed through his mind: magic is the embodiment of the wizard's will. Chapter 14, Charms. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Magic is a kind of power that can make all wishes come true, and Transfiguration is the most typical embodiment. Many students seem to think that the transformation was unsuccessful because their spells were not recited clearly and accurately enough, or their wand movements were not decisive enough, so they tried in various ways. But when Professor McGonagall turned the table into a pig just now, there was no special movement or spell at all. Just a tap of the wand and the table deformed. Vader raised his wand and pointed it at the match. In mind, clear images, unbreakable faith, and unwavering confidence. If the concept of needle is vague in your mind, or you are thinking, this is really difficult, can magic do it? I can't do it, I will definitely fail at the beginning. With such thoughts, it will be difficult for the spell to succeed. The wand is like a guide for the magic power in the wizard's body, making the magic power more compliant and peaceful, while incantations, gestures, or magic rituals are more like means to strengthen beliefs and the wizard's self-hypnosis. A skilled wizard can make the world change according to his will without any extraneous things. Very good, Miss Granger. Professor McGonagall suddenly praised. It's an obvious change. One more point for Gryffindor. The surrounding students couldn't help but stretch their heads to take a look, and saw that the match in front of Hermione not only became very pointed at one end, but also was a little closer to silvery white in color, making it look a bit like a needle. The brown-haired girl tried hard not to show her excitement, her eyes sparkling. Professor McGonagall said, "Miss Granger, maybe you would like to demonstrate the process of transformation with everyone again?" In view of. Before Professor McGonagall finished speaking, she heard a burst of exclamation from the students on the other side. Wade's match suddenly became slender and sharp, with thin holes at the end, and the surface shone with a metallic luster. Professor McGonagall walked over quickly, used her wand to levitate the needle and inspected it carefully, with a happy and satisfied smile on her face. Perfect transformation, plus 3 points for Ravenclaw. She restored the needle to its original shape and asked the little wizards to gather around to watch Vader's demonstration. In the midst of everyone's gaze, Vader muttered a spell in a low voice and tapped his wand lightly. The match quickly stretched and changed color, and in an instant, a slender silver needle appeared on the table. Everyone exclaimed wow in unison. Wade raised his eyes, glanced at Hermione, who had a somewhat unwilling look on her face, and then met a pair of green eyes. The boy with messy black hair smiled friendly, with surprise and admiration in his eyes, while the red-haired boy with freckles next to him had a silly expression. "They say Ravenclaw is the smartest." After class, Vader heard the red-haired Ron say to Harry, "I understand a little better now." After Transfiguration class, there is Charms class, with only 10 minutes to change classrooms. After Professor McGonagall finished assigning the homework, a group of people all headed towards the Charms classroom with a huff of cheers. The Charms class was still divided between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. Hermione ignored the difference between the colleges and sat directly next to Vader and asked, "Do you have any other plans after class?" Wade said, "Get ready to go to the practice room." "Okay." Hermione breathed a sigh of relief and said, "I also plan to go over there and continue to practice Transfiguration." "How did you succeed in it? Do you have any tips?" "As for the trick, you have to believe that you can definitely do it. This is the most important thing." Before Vader could finish his words, Professor Flitwick walked in. Phileas Flitwick, Professor of Charms, is the headmaster of Ravenclaw House. He is only 1 meter tall and about the size of a 3 or 4-year-old child, but he has long white hair and a fluffy white beard. In order to teach the students who were taller than him when they sat down, Professor Flitwick had a thick pile of books placed on his desk, forming the shape of steps, and he climbed to the top of the steps. Some of the students couldn't help but chuckle. Okay, children." Professor Flitwick held the short wand in his small hand. "Maybe some of you are thinking, why do we need this little teacher to teach us?" Many students laughed at the professor's self-deprecating words. It seemed that the professor didn't mind someone joking with him. "In other words, what can he teach me?" Professor Flitwick said, waving his wand, and a flock of birds flew out from the tip of his wand and flew around the heads of the students. He clicked with the wand again, and the 2 books grew slender arms and legs like bamboo branches, floating in the air and dancing. The students applauded one after another, convinced. Although it only lasted 2 minutes, they had already fallen in love with this short professor. He was not as timid as Quirrell, nor as boring as Professor Binns, nor like Professor McGonagall or Professor Snape. It's so severe that it's scary. Ravenclaws can't help but think proudly, our head of house must be the best professor in Hogwarts. Thank you. Thank you for your applause. Professor Flitwick said softly, I think charms is the most interesting course. A wizard who can't do charms cannot be called a wizard. Of course. Before going to class, I first want to name my lovely students and get to know them. Professor Flitwick called the names from the roster, and things started going smoothly until Harry Potter. Before waiting for an answer, the professor screamed and fell from the pile of books with a thud. The students were stunned and looked at each other. Many of them looked at the black-haired boy. Harry Potter raised his right hand awkwardly and said hesitantly to the empty pile of books, I'm here, Professor. There was another small scream from behind the pile of books. After a long time, Professor Flitwick with a messy beard crawled out from inside, muttering, Oh, of course you are in my classroom too, of course, I should have known it long ago. The elderly professor touched his beard, gave himself a clean up, looked at Harry Potter excitedly, and said, Nice to see you, kid. Harry nodded and smiled shyly. Wade didn't know if Professor Flitwick saw someone's shadow in Harry Potter. He was silent for a moment before continuing to call the roll. The first spell class, of course, also started with theory. We only learned the simplest spell, Lumos. This kind of spell can be learned by practicing it twice at home before school starts. Therefore, by the end of the get out of class, everyone has successfully mastered it. Professor Flitwick generously gave both colleges similar marks. He didn't leave much homework, only 3 inches, which was basically a review of the key points covered in class. If Wade was a little lazy and handed in his notes in class, it would probably be about the same. Chapter 15 Differences in Academic Ability. You are listening at Audio. After the freshmen gradually became familiar with the ever-changing stairs in the castle, Wade's life in Hogwarts also formed a certain routine. The schedule for first-year freshmen is very easy. There is only 1 class a day at the least, and no more than 3 classes at most. The rest of the time is at the student's disposal. After seeing such a class schedule, Wade was very skeptical for a while. Why can't those students who complain about the professor's too much homework on time complete a few inches of paper? In his previous life, when Wade was less than 10 years old, he had to write at least 300 words, and that was in Chinese, which is called a language compression package. If converted to English, he could easily expand it to 1,000 words. After systematic training in high school, college, and graduate school, it is not impossible for him to write 10,000 words in 2 days. After studying with Michael, Hermione and others for a period of time, Wade understood the reason. Among the first-year students, except for Wade, Hermione was the easiest to complete the paper. At the very least, she would not make mistakes in basic grammar, and rarely encountered words that she could not spell. She could quickly grasp the key points in the text and then retell them clearly. The above points were difficult for the other 3 to do, even Michael from Ravenclaw. Because they all came from wizard families, the lives of wizards and ordinary people are almost completely isolated, even if one of the couples is a muggle. Most wizard families live in isolation. Not only do they never take the initiative to contact muggles, they will also set up muggle-repelling spells near their homes to prevent muggles from accidentally breaking into their lives. Therefore, wizards do not understand how muggles dress, do not understand the development of muggle technology, and will not send their underage children to muggle schools to study. In their eyes, this is no different from humans sending their children to monkeys living in trees to teach. There is only one magic school in the UK, Hogwarts, and there is no magic elementary school or magic university. In the wizarding world, children under the age of 11 are basically educated at home. If parents have time, they will teach their children to read, write, and do simple arithmetic. If they encounter irresponsible parents, their children may not even know how to spell with a quill pen. Michael and his friends have basically been educated by their parents since they were 5 or 6 years old. At least they don't have much problem with reading and writing. However, being able to read and write is different from learning ability. Compared with the systematic education in Muggle schools, the family education of wizards lacks a lot of things. For example, when wizard parents teach their children to read, they don't actually cultivate the ability of logical reasoning and induction and summary. Wade suspects that many wizards may not have any concept in this regard at all. After all, they have always been dismissive of Muggle theories, and the little wizards, including Hermione, basically lack the ability to quickly extract the key points from the article and understand it. For example, the young wizards can only understand the temperature of objects A and B is equal, and the temperature of B and C is equal, so the temperature of A and C is also equal, but their reference books say if each of the 2 thermodynamic systems is in thermal equilibrium with the 3rd thermodynamic system, then they must also be in thermal equilibrium with each other. That is, if it can be confirmed that the physical properties of the 2 systems will not change when heat can be exchanged, even if the 2 systems are not allowed to exchange heat, it can be confirmed that they are in a state of mutual equilibrium. Young wizards. A string of letters slid smoothly through the brain without leaving a trace. Hermione can memorize all the content with her powerful memory, and then slowly understand it by comparing different materials, but most young wizards can only write down a bunch of notes that they can't understand, scratch their heads and hand in a homework, hoping that the professor will be kind enough to give them an A pass. Moreover, The 11-year-old child was away from his parents to study in a boarding school, and the discipline of the college professors was not strict. Even Professor McGonagall or Professor Snape, who were known for their strictness, would not care whether the little wizards who had no classes slept in the dormitory or played games in the lounge. This relaxed environment is naturally a great test for the self-control of minors. Laziness and playing are human nature, but learning is not. Learning is only interesting to a very small number of people, for example, Hermione, for example, Wade. In just half a month, the two stood out from the first-year freshmen. The difference is that Hermione is strict with herself and others, and she firmly refuses any copying of homework in violation of school rules, while Wade never minds others copying his homework. When he is studying hard in the practice room and practicing spells repeatedly, he never forces others to work hard with him. Wade actually understands the laziness of teenagers in learning. He was like this in his previous life. In this life, he worked harder than others, not because he loved studying, but because he loved magic, because for him, magic was not an innate and natural ability, so he cherished this opportunity more than anyone else in the school. Once again, practice was close to curfew time, and Wade hurried back to Ravenclaw Tower. At this time, the corridor outside was quiet, as if everyone was asleep. But as soon as he entered the lounge, he felt that it was too early. Hogwarts has a curfew but no lights out time, and students can stay in the brightly lit common room all night if they choose. At this time, there were many students of all grades in the Ravenclaw lounge. There were lovers in love sitting on the sofa in the corner talking sweetly, there were bored little wizards playing wizard chess on the round tea table, and there were also senior students. Students in the first grade are rushing to catch up on their homework. Although there were many people, it didn't seem noisy. The Ravenclaws consciously lowered their voices when talking. 7 or 8 people gathered on the sofa in front of the fireplace, and girls giggled from time to time. Wade glanced over there and casually found a remote corner to sit down, reading and taking notes. When Michael and the crowd saw this, he smiled and said something to the girl next to him, then walked to sit next to Wade. "Learning so late again?" Michael leaned on the table and said, "Vede, we have been in school for less than a month, and you have almost finished learning all the content in the first grade. What are you doing with the rest of the time?" "I didn't say that. You are working too hard, you should relax sometimes." "Wade, brother, do you know how many girls want to know you?" He raised his eyebrows towards the fireplace, causing another chuckle among the girls. Vader stopped his quill, looked at Michael quietly with his gray eyes, and asked, "I don't know." "But Michael, do you know how long we can stay at Hogwarts?" Chapter 16. Time waits for no one. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What? Michael looked confused. The school system of Hogwarts is 7 years, but if you don't pass any of the ordinary wizarding level examinations, also known as OWL, you have to leave school after graduating from the 5th year. Michael didn't understand why Wade asked such a question that everyone knew. 7 years. Wade said with some sadness, there are only 52 weeks in a year. Excluding summer vacation and Christmas vacation, we can only stay in school for a total of about 38 weeks a year, and 7 years is only 266 weeks. Michael thought for a while. That's right, so what? So. Even if I can finish a book in a week, there are only 266 books in 7 years. But how many books are there in the Hogwarts library? Thousands. It's like a vault full of treasures, open for you to take at will, but you come in and take a small bag of gold galleons out. Don't you think it's a pity? Michael felt that what he said made sense, and he suddenly had a sense of urgency in his heart that time is running out. And think about it, Wade continued, only in these 7 years, no, in 266 weeks, we can ask questions to the greatest wizards of the time at any time in the safest place in the world. The one who teaches us Transfiguration is Professor McGonagall, one of the only 7 animagus since the 20th century. The one who teaches us spells is Professor Flitwick, the champion of the dueling competition, and the one who teaches us potions is Professor Snape, the master of potions. Although the professor of defense against the dark arts is a little bit worse, where else can you find such a good learning environment after leaving Hogwarts? After graduation, when you encounter problems with advanced magic or potions, who can guide you so selflessly and teach you how to do it. When you want to learn powerful spells in the future but can't find a way, won't it be too late to miss the library of Hogwarts? Not only Michael, but the students around him who had become quiet at some point couldn't help but nodded. So Michael, Wade asked in a deep voice, do you still think that it is enough for us to study only 8 books in 1/7 of the time? Michael, who had been completely convinced by Wade's theory, shook his head vigorously. He wanted to say something but didn't say it. But when he thought of the 2 weeks he had wasted, he couldn't help feeling a little anxious. He stopped chatting with the girls and took out the beginner's guide to Transfiguration that he had thrown into the corner and started studying. For a while, the Ravenclaw common room became quiet, with only the sound of pages turning and quills writing. The 2 fifth-year students who hurried back at curfew thought that Professor Snape had invaded the Ravenclaw common room. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly and tiptoed back to the dormitory, dinner time, in the hall. Something is wrong, Fred. Yes, it's really wrong, George. The red-haired twins looked at each other, and they reached out their hands at the same time, randomly grabbed a student from Ravenclaw College, and pressed him to his own desk before he could scream. What do you two want to do, Weasley? The Ravenclaw boy who was held down by them said unhappily, I don't have time to participate in your pranks. Huh? What? Ron, who was chewing a chicken leg, looked up in confusion. It's none of your business, little Ronnie. Fred pushed his brother's head back, and the twins put their arms around the necks of the Ravenclaw boys on the left and right, and asked, Davis, what's going on with you Ravenclaws recently? Holding books while eating. Holding books while walking. There are not many Ravenclaws in the courtyard during lunch break. Even Quidditch training is not as active as before. I didn't even go on a date on weekends. You didn't like reading so much before. Seriously, did Snape secretly drug you? For example, a love potion called Love of Learning or something. Associating Professor Snape's face with a love potion that exudes a pink smell, Roger Davis couldn't help but tremble. Don't talk nonsense, Professor Snape will not give a love potion. No, I mean there is no such love potion. No, we just suddenly realized life is short, and the time we can use to study is even shorter. Huh? The 2 Weasleys looked at him inexplicably. Roger Davis took a deep breath and looked at the twins solemnly. Fred, George, do you know how long we can stay in Hogwarts? Fred silently reached out to feel the temperature of his forehead. My brain is not burned. Davis slapped his hand down and said seriously, such as 266 weeks, tens of thousands of books, not studying hard is like going into a treasure mountain but returning empty-handed and other theories. After that, Davis went to the Ravenclaw long table to have dinner with a book in his arms. The Weasley brothers looked at each other, and even Harry and Ron, who were originally concentrating on eating, stopped unconsciously. The atmosphere of hard study began to spread quietly in Hogwarts. Of course, most people are only enthusiastic for a short time. For example, Ron, he only worked hard to compile the paper on the history of magic and then started to play with his moving wizard chess. For example, the twins, they still spent most of their time on pranks and studying magic tricks. But there are also some people who are secretly motivated to start working hard. Michael is a person who works hard intermittently. He is smart but not hard-working. Sometimes he will be influenced by Wade and work hard for a while, but soon he will be attracted by something more interesting, such as using magic to manipulate small paper figures to fight, or discussing music or clothes with beautiful girls. In the practice room, most of the time it is Wade, Hermione, Theo, and Ryan. Sometimes Professor Sprout of the herbology class will come to take a look, probably worried that they are doing some dangerous practice here. After seeing the layout of the practice room and the learning results of several people, he praised them highly, added 5 points to each college, and said that students can ask her questions when she has no classes, and she is happy to answer students' questions. Professor Sprout is really a very gentle and amiable witch. She almost never treats students differently because of the difference between colleges, and only prefers those students who are particularly talented in herbology. Not long after, Professor Sprout recommended a Gryffindor student to their study group. Neville Longbottom, the round-faced boy, was honest and simple. He was very clumsy in learning and learned spells slower than anyone else, but he worked very hard and didn't cause trouble. He quickly integrated into their small group. On a weekend night, a notice posted on the bulletin board in the lounge caused all the first-year students to get restless. Starting next week, they would have flying lessons. Chapter 17 Flying Lesson. You are listening at Audio. Flying has always been mankind's biggest dream, and Vader is no exception. In his opinion, one of the greatest benefits of learning magic is that you can fly freely in the sky. Of course, you can also fly into the sky by airplane, and it is more comfortable than riding a broom or flying horse. But there's no doubt about it, the latter is much cooler. Ravenclaw's flying lessons are with Hufflepuff on Friday afternoons. Before that, Thursday afternoon was Gryffindor and Slytherin flying lessons. Starting Monday, all the freshmen were talking about flying, and Michael was no different. You know, my most thrilling experience was riding a broomstick and racing down a cliff with an eagle. Michael boasted with a sausage stuck on his fork. We started from 1,300 meters away. It swooped down from high altitude and finally hovered only 15 centimeters above the ground. The grass on the ground could touch the tip of my nose. Isn't that great? Theo at the next table believed it and exclaimed, "Michael, you should play Quidditch. You must be good at Wronski's fake moves." Many famous players can't do this. Michael's face turned slightly red, and he forced himself to say, "Of course. I have to say that after Professor Flitwick sees my wonderful performance in the flying class, he might invite me to join the Quidditch team in advance." Woolen cloth. Definitely. You are simply a genius. Theo praised loudly. Michael blushed even more. At the long table, some senior Ravenclaw girls looked at Michael and chuckled, obviously seeing through his lie. In order to cover up his embarrassment, Michael turned around and said, "Veed, do you need me to give you some flying instructions in advance? So that you won't feel nervous when you get on the broom. I'm an expert in this area. I rode it before I could walk. Flying around the house on a broomstick. Really? I think we also need some guidance." Hermione pulled Neville over quickly and sat next to her. She also held a pile of books in her arms. Quidditch Origins, Wigton the Miracle of the Hobos, He Flies Like a Madman, that sort of thing. "You borrowed so many books?" Wade asked in surprise. "Yeah, but it's not very helpful." Hermione put the book on the table and said anxiously, "Almost all of these books are about the barbaric sport of Quidditch, and they don't even talk about how to fly more smoothly." The girl's words immediately aroused dissatisfaction among Quidditch fans. Michael raised his eyebrows and said, "Barbaric? Hermione, you probably don't understand yet. Quidditch is the most popular and exciting sport. Everyone loves Quidditch. It has nothing to do with savagery. No, I should say, you don't understand its wild charm at all." "Really?" Hermione asked unceremoniously, "But it makes Snidget a protected animal. On the verge of extinction. There's nothing wrong with Quidditch." Michael yelled first, then asked strangely, "What is the golden snitch? Does it sound a bit like the golden snitch?" "That is a small bird that flies quickly." Vader happened to have seen this part before. He said, "In the past, a golden snidget was released in Quidditch games." "When did the team's hunters kill the bird?" "When will the game end?" Therefore, the number of snitches has become extremely rare from being as common as sparrows, and protected areas have to be established to prevent them from being completely extinct. Later, although the golden snitch was invented to replace the role of the snitch, Quidditch in some countries. The team seems to have retained its old customs, so until now, golden snidget is still a protected animal. Hermione raised her head and said, "Yes, so Quidditch is a barbaric sport based on the lives of countless gold snitches. It's a pity that not many people pay attention to the poor gold snitch now, just for the kind of sport that can cause death." Cheer. The girl completely forgot why she was sitting at this table, hugged her book and left angrily, leaving the remaining boys looking at each other. After a while, Neville said timidly, "So, flight instructor, is there any more?" He said with a frown, "I have never flown before, and my grandma won't let me get close to a broomstick. not even a toy broomstick. No. Well, of course. Michael said enthusiastically, it's actually very simple to ride a broom. You just need to hold the stick in front of you with your hands, and then push hard with your feet, and you can fly. The most important thing is to keep your balance and turn. You must be flexible when doing it. The models of various flying broomsticks are very different. It would be good if the public broom provided by the school can have a sweeping 7-star, but the best one at the moment is definitely the Nimbus 2000. Michael's flight instructions were only 2 or 3 sentences long, and he spent the rest of the time talking endlessly about the capabilities of the Nimbus series. Theo was very supportive and believed every word he said. Neville stared at his big round eyes and tried to write down everything he said, but in the end there were only a few lines on the paper: hold the handle, push hard on the ground, and maintain balance. Ryan secretly told Wade, I'm sure Michael has only ever ridden a toy broomstick before. Why do you say that? Wade asked, have you ever ridden a real one? I have never ridden one by myself because my mother wouldn't let me, saying it was too dangerous. Ryan said, but my dad had a Comet, and he once held me and flew several times in the sky. He said that for beginners, it's too dangerous to ride. It's good if you can sit firmly on it, and you can't fly in a hurry, because the flying broomstick is much faster than a toy broomstick, and there is no height limit. He looked at Michael's eloquent appearance and shook his head slightly. There's nothing to worry about. Wade comforted him, the professor is still here. Although he had no memory of the detailed plot of Harry Potter, he remembered Neville's highlight performance in the final battle. What big trouble can happen in an ordinary flying lesson? Speaking of which, in my impression, there does seem to be a plot about flying lessons. Vader rubbed his chin, trying to dig out useful fragments from his memory. It seems that Neville was bullied by Draco. And then Harry Potter stood up for him. That should be the case. On Thursday afternoon, Ravenclaw only had one charms class with Slytherin. After class, the Slytherins happily ran to the lawn. That's where the flying lessons were. The Ravenclaws didn't have any classes after that, so they just went to watch. It was rare for Vader to move with the large group. It was a flying lesson after all. The students gathered in the corridor in 2s and 3s, eavesdropping on the speech of Mrs. Huichi, the flying course professor there, hoping to learn something in advance so as not to be embarrassed in the formal class tomorrow. It didn't take long for them to see Neville. Yes, it was Neville. While everyone else was still standing on the ground, the boy shot straight into the sky like a cannonball. There were horrified screams in the sky, and then a figure fell straight down. Before anyone else had time to react, he slammed into the grass with a bang. There was silence among the crowd. Chapter 18 Infirmary. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Is he dead? A girl asked in a low voice in horror. The Ravenclaws who witnessed this scene suddenly had a great fear of flying lessons, especially Michael who had been talking non-stop before. He looked at the figure lying in the grass with a pale face, and his voice was trembling. Is it my fault? Wade patted his shoulder and comforted him. It shouldn't be a big problem. He didn't hit the ground on his head when he fell. Michael's throat rolled and he was speechless. Fortunately, Mrs. Hooch immediately ran over to check and quickly helped Neville up from the grass. Thank God, the boy only had one wrist and looked a little strange. Mrs. Hooch helped him to the infirmary and shouted a warning. Other students are not allowed to move. Vader. Michael pleaded, let's go see Neville. Wade glanced at the other students standing blankly on the grass, nodded, and the two of them quickly ran through the corridor to the infirmary. Flying lessons, right? Through the door, they heard Madame Pomfrey, the school nurse, say with surprise, at this time every year, there are always some accidents among the first-year students. I can't even think of it. Which year was peaceful? Wade gently opened the door, and Michael squeezed one head in first. Neville was seen crying and sitting on the bed in the infirmary. Madame Pomfrey held his arm and gently shook the wand to check. The top of the wand was scattered with feather-like light. Then this student will be left to you. Mrs. Huichi said eagerly, there are still more than 20 students on the lawn with unattended brooms. Alas, if it weren't for the lack of time, I should really ask Mr. Filch looks at them. Madame Pomfrey said, okay, I'll. Mrs. Huichi was obviously impatient. She turned around and left in a hurry after hearing okay. The door suddenly opened and Michael stumbled in. Seeing the two students, Mrs. Huichi's eagle-like eyes immediately stood up, as if she was about to reprimand them. But then she noticed their blue and bronze ties, and her anger died down again. Since they were not students who had sneaked out of her classroom, Mrs. Huichi had no time to care about them and walked away with wind on her feet. Take good care of this child. The rest of Madame Pomfrey's words seemed like she was talking to herself. She gently comforted the crying Neville, don't worry, it's just a small problem. Let's take a look. It'll be cured. I promise you won't miss tonight's dinner. Madame Pomfrey waved her wand and a potion flew from the shelf. She let Neville drink, then pointed her wand at his arm and whispered a spell, as if in the blink of an eye, the boy's broken wrist was reattached. Judging from his expression, Neville didn't even feel much pain. Vader watched in amazement. What about you, children? Madame Pomfrey turned to look at the two people at the door and asked, are you injured? Are you sick? Or are you hungry? Michael pursed his lips and said nothing. Vader had no choice but to say, Mrs. Pomfrey, let's come see Neville. Oh, come to visit a friend. Madame Pomfrey was a little happy when she heard this and said, Mr. Longbottom just needs to rest for a while. After the bones are fully grown, he can go back with you. Thank you, ma'am, Vader said, and Neville also thanked him. After Madame Pomfrey left, Vader asked, how are you, Neville? Does your wrist still hurt? It doesn't hurt much anymore. Neville shook his head and lifted up his robe. You could see that the wound on his leg was healing quickly. Look, it's almost healed here. Madame Pomfrey's healing skills are really powerful. That's probably what happened with St. Mungo's. St. Mungo's? The largest magic hospital in Britain, the best healers are there. Neville said. Michael walked over slowly and whispered, Neville. The boy looked up at him. Michael lowered his head in shame. I'm sorry, I lied. I have never ridden a broomstick before. The trick I told you was also heard from the radio. I actually have no experience myself. Neville blinked. I know. He said. Huh. Michael's eyes widened in surprise. Neville explained. Hermione said you wouldn't be so excited about flying lessons if you were used to riding a broomstick. Michael's face turned red. Did everyone see his frivolous talk? But Hermione also said, Neville added, what you said is correct, it is also written in the book. But after all, flying is not a skill that can be mastered only by knowing the theory, right? I don't know why. Michael suddenly wanted to cry. Wade looked at this scene with a smile. Originally, when he looked at these classmates, he felt somewhat like taking care of children. But at this moment, Wade felt, maybe they could really become good friends. Although Madame Pomfrey healed Neville's wrist easily, it still took a while to wait for the bone to heal. Because of guilt, Michael was unwilling to leave Neville alone in the infirmary and insisted on waiting until he was fully recovered before going to have dinner together. On the way, the stairs changed direction again, causing several people to walk twice as long as usual before returning to the auditorium. In short, when they returned, the last dessert on the long table also disappeared. Oh, bad. Michael said with a bitter face, I should have some candy in my dormitory. Hi, Michael, Neville, Wade. Theo and Ryan came over. The two of them have been friends since childhood, and they are almost inseparable, like conjoined twins after going to school. We heard that Neville had an accident in the flying class. Theo looked at Neville with concern. Are you okay? Broken wrist. Neville raised his arm to show him, but Madame Pomfrey healed it in a moment. Great. Theo grabbed his arm and looked at it, and said happily. Have you had dinner? Ryan asked. We didn't see you just now. No. Michael looked at the two pitifully, and asked expectantly, did you two leave us a piece of bread or something? No, but it's better than that. Theo pulled Michael out of the hall. Come with us. Where are we going? Neville asked confusedly. You'll see it soon. This is a secret that only Hufflepuff students know. A senior student told us the day before yesterday. Theo said excitedly. I dare say that nothing can be hidden from the Weasley twins. Michael said to Wade, and Wade nodded in agreement. They passed through a door and walked down a stone staircase to a wide stone corridor. The torches on the walls on both sides illuminated the corridor. There were many decorative paintings on the walls like other places in the castle, but there were few people in the paintings. All of them were various delicacies. Theo stopped in front of a huge fruit painting, reached out his hand, and gently scratched the pear in the painting. Chapter 19 Zoe and Peeves. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The pear squirmed as if it was ticklish, chuckled, and turned into a green doorknob. Theo grabbed the door handle and pulled it open, and everyone entered one after another. This is a very vast room. The size and layout of the room are the same as the auditorium above. There are also 4 long tables, but there is nothing on the tables. There were many gleaming kitchen utensils beside the surrounding stone walls, and there was a brick fireplace at the other end, with a roaring flame and the smell of barbecue. There are many strange-looking creatures in the room. They have big bat-like ears, round eyes that protrude like frogs, and look as big as tennis balls. They also have slender noses like pencils, and slender limbs. Tea towels with the Hogwarts crest printed on them were worn as robes. When the little monsters heard the noise, they all turned their heads and looked over. They looked at several students with eager and expectant eyes, but did not gather around them. Whichever direction Vader and the others looked, the little monsters would bow to them and curtsy, appearing very respectful. Oh my God! Michael was extremely surprised and said enviously, so many house elves. Welcome to the Hogwarts kitchen. Theo said, opening his arms. This is the best place in Hogwarts. You can tell them what you want to eat. The elves are very enthusiastic. Ryan also said. Hello. Vader bent down and looked at the nearest house elf and asked, can you get us something to eat? Of course. Of course, sir. The house elf said softly, I would be honored. The house elves happily brought over various delicacies such as pies, steaks, baked potatoes, egg tarts, and plum pudding, as well as orange juice, pumpkin juice, vegetable juice, and even 2 bottles of butterbeer. After several people had eaten and drank enough, the elves brought many desserts after the meal, vowing to make them satisfied. I can't eat any more. Neville said with difficulty after taking a lick of an ice cream cone. Almost all Hufflepuff students know where the kitchen is because our common room is nearby. So it's an open secret. Theo told Michael, there are always all kinds of good things in our common room. Food, Hufflepuffs never go hungry. It's wonderful. Michael sighed while drinking butterbeer. Why can't I be a Hufflepuff? What are you talking about? Ryan mocked. I heard someone say during the sorting, if he was sorted into Hufflepuff, he would rather drop out of school. There's nothing good about Ravenclaw. Michael sighed. Ravenclaw Tower is too high, really too high. I climb the stairs every day and want to die. Every time I go back to rest after class everyone must make a big decision. He seemed to have had a little too much to drink, and he spoke very aggrievedly. Vader managed to control himself from filling his stomach, but it was obvious that he was not very drunk as he was drinking for the first time. He was knocked down with just 2 rum-filled chocolates and a glass of butterbeer. At this moment, Wade's head was dizzy, and he looked at people with double visions. He propped his chin up, yawned lazily, and was identifying the house elves one by one. Coco, Amy, Becky, Happy, Lola, Phil. Being read out by the wizard seemed to be a great honor for the elves. They lined up to tell Vader their names, as if they were performing some ritual. Zoe? Are you a girl? Wade recognized the elf who first talked to him. To be honest, the elves all have wrinkled faces like 80-year-olds. Apart from their names, their appearance and clothing are indistinguishable from each other by gender. Why yes, Mr. Gray. Zoe said, wringing her fingers nervously and excitedly. Are you the ones who usually help us clean the room and do the laundry? Wade asked. Yes, sir. Zoe nodded vigorously. looking at Vader seriously with her big eyes. The people in charge of Ravenclaw Tower are Zoe, Happy and Phil. If you look closely, you can see that the house elf's tea towel is decorated with a tiny flower. She is indeed a girl. Are you guys cleaning other parts of the castle as well? Wade asked again. Yes, sir. Were you the ones who took our luggage off the train? Yes, sir. Thank you. Wade sighed and said, it's really a lot of work. No, how could it be? Zoe said quickly, we like to work. Work does not make us feel hard. It is really terrible not to have work. That the house elves all expressed how dedicated they were to their work and how they never slacked off. They try their best to make dinner that satisfies everyone, polish every piece of silverware until it shines, wash the students' muddy shoes, and they always appear and disappear quietly. He never disturbs others and is a very good house elf. Wade looked at them silently and didn't speak for a long time. After dinner, it was almost the curfew time. The elves enthusiastically stuffed several people with cream cakes and fried jam donuts, and then they returned to the college lounge. Vader and Michael walked up the movable stairs. When they were tired and panting, the armor on the wall suddenly shook, and then a white guy suddenly jumped out, and at the same time let out a roar like a wild beast. Yell. Ah! Michael was startled, his feet went weak and he sat on the ground. Ha ha ha. The white guy held his belly and laughed loudly. He floated in the air and kicked his feet wildly. Michael was angry and funny. Peeves. You are hiding here again to scare people. Peeves is a special ghost in Hogwarts. He can float around, possess entities, touch objects, and loves to cause chaos. As his name suggests, he is a very naughty and mischievous guy. Look. There are two little wizards here. They stay up at night and wander around outside. In the corridor, Peeves circled around Vader and the two of them and said maliciously, wait a minute, I want to call Fairy come here Chi. Catch you little rascals. Peeves likes to scare students who go out at night like this, and then chase them all the way to watch them run back to the dormitory in panic. Sometimes he will tease them by pulling their robes and hair. But this time he miscalculated, because with a wave of Vader's wand, a row of golden characters appeared in front of him, writing the current time. Ha! Michael gasped and laughed. There are still 7 minutes until curfew. You can't fool us, Peeves. Peeves rolled his round eyes and said slyly, 7 minutes, it's not enough for you to return to Ravenclaw Tower. Yes. But by the time you recruit Filch, we will definitely have gone back. Wade said comfortably. Peeves curled his lips and muttered, humph, boring Ravenclaw. He turned around and floated away to find other students to play pranks on. Chapter 20 Riddles, Rumors. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Michael breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, I wasn't pestered by Peeves. It would be terrible if he really called Filch. It is unlikely that Peeves will go to Filch. Vader pulled him up from the ground and said, have you forgotten? The two of them hate each other, and Peeves will not be willing to do it to make Filch happy. That's right. Michael nodded. Peeves often wreaks havoc, either knocking down statues or spilling ink everywhere, which adds a lot of workload to Filch, the administrator of the castle, and drives Filch crazy. The two of them walked up the steps of the Ravenclaw Tower, which made them dizzy. After walking for a while, they had to stop and rest. Their thighs were so sore that they felt as if they were not their own. Usually at this time, Michael would complain endlessly. Unless there was a beautiful girl next to him, he would pretend not to be reluctant at all and stop to rest in the name of taking care of the girl, but today, Michael was very silent. It wasn't until the two of them were about to return to the lounge that he said, we will also have flying lessons tomorrow. Wade, yeah. Forget the nonsense I said. Michael said sullenly, follow Mrs. Hooch's instructions and take your time. Vader said helplessly, what happened to Neville was just an accident. Not everyone is as unlucky as him. Michael may not know this in his heart, but he can't let go of the burden in his heart for a while. After finally returning to the tower, it was already past the curfew time, but there were still a few students gathered in the corridor. not every Ravenclaw is good at solving puzzles, which involve blind spots in knowledge, and even the smartest brains can't do anything about it. So sometimes you can see more than 20 students standing outside the common room, discussing and answering the questions of the day. Wade walked over and knocked on the bronze door knocker on the wooden board. The eagle's beak on the door knocker suddenly opened, and said in a voice as gentle as a chant, "There are hands above and below, sometimes crawling and sometimes walking. When walking, they look like people, and when they crawl, they look like dogs." The questions posed by the eagle-shaped door knocker must be answered correctly for the lounge door to open. Michael imagined some kind of dark crawling creature covered with hands, and said with a horrified look, "What kind of monster is this? Is it a demon from some mythology?" That he hurriedly found his textbook Monsters and Their Origins from his bag and flipped through it without hesitation. "Don't read it, it's not in the book." A Ravenclaw student said tiredly, "I've already read through the entire book." Several others nodded silently. Vader stood thinking, the bronze door knocker is like the legendary Sphinx. The questions it asks may not be difficult, but sometimes they are not easy to think of, because the door knocker always only asks questions, but does not tell them whether it is a brain teaser or a riddle. It will not prompt that the answer is a plant, animal, utensil, word, or intangible thing, such as time, death, etc. This riddle sounds very Cthulhu-like at first glance, but it also feels a little familiar. "Monkey?" After a moment, Wade asked uncertainly. "Correct answer." The eagle-shaped door knocker said, opening the wooden door. After an accident during a flying lesson, the breakfast table was much quieter the next day. Students no longer tirelessly tell stories about how they once flew across mountains and seas on broomsticks. Instead, another piece of news spreads among the first-year students. Didn't Harry Potter and Slytherin Malfoy almost get into a fight yesterday during the flying class? Guess what happened? Padma Patil spoke in a mysterious tone on the long table. People around said, "I heard that because Harry Potter showed amazing flying talent, not only was he not punished, but he was recommended by Professor McGonagall to join the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Since she had a twin sister in Gryffindor House, she was always well informed." Really? That Professor McGonagall? The students around were surprised. Who doesn't know that Professor McGonagall is the most impartial and strict professor at Hogwarts? She treats the 4 colleges equally and never shows any favoritism. This time she made an exception for Harry Potter. This shock even made people forget the previous news for a moment, but eventually someone remembered it. "This is impossible," Terry said firmly. "No first-year freshman has been able to join the Quidditch team in a century. This must be a rumor. Maybe he is a reserve player or something." Anthony guessed, "After all, we have all seen that Potter flies very well, fast and dexterous. If the Gryffindor team shuts him out, then it's unbelievable. But after all, he is a freshman, has never ridden a broom before, and doesn't even know the rules of Quidditch. It's still ridiculous to join the team directly, he should only be a reserve member." Another student, Kevin, also said, "Think about it, if Potter really made an exception and joined the team, the Weasley brothers would have already shouted out. But have you heard their movements?" That the analysis was sound and well-founded, and everyone nodded in agreement. Padma curled her lips disdainfully and whispered to Michael, "Actually, Gryffindor captain would want it to use Harry Potter as a secret weapon, so he didn't let it be publicized. Those stupid boys were just jealous, so I just don't want to admit it." Michael didn't remind her that he was also one of the boys, but smiled and said, "Maybe they just don't want to admit that they are not as good as another boy in front of a beautiful girl." Padma blushed slightly. Wade looked sideways and saw Michael raised one eyebrow at him. He looked so romantic and wanton at such a young age, as if he had walked out of the shadow before. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the restaurant. 6 long-eared owls carrying a long and thin package flew into the hall with difficulty, attracting everyone's attention. The owls circled down, threw the package in front of Harry Potter, and then flapped their wings and flew away, leaving only a few feathers. Michael gasped, grabbed Wade's wrist, and said in a low voice, "Broom. I bet it's definitely a flying broom." That he was so envious that his eyes turned red, and he said in a voice that sounded like vomiting blood, "And it's a Nimbus series, I recognize that packaging." "Yeah." Wade pried his fingers apart, put his hand back on the table, and said nonchalantly, "If you perform well in the afternoon flying class, you may have the opportunity to join the team and get a new broom." That he just said it casually, but Michael seemed to take it seriously. His eyes became particularly serious, and his teeth were particularly strong when he bit down the lamb chops. Soon, it was time for the flying class.